So let me begin by thanking you all for being here on this Friday evening, and also thanking the organisers of this event for inviting me to speak. I've got two main aims this evening. Firstly, to sketch out the history behind monitoring groups in Britain, and secondly, to outline the core principles and values underpinning monitoring groups, and how those principles and values speak to wider forms of anti-racism. It's worth mentioning that there have been multiple monitoring groups in the history of British anti-racist struggle. These include the Southall Monitoring Group, the Newham Monitoring Project, the more recent Northern Police Monitoring Project, and of course, Bristol Cop Watch. As such, monitoring groups in Britain have their own unique histories, yet they are also part of a collective history of organised grassroots resistance against state and police violence. That said, today I'll focus on the history and principles of the Southall Monitoring Group. While the Southall Monitoring Group emerged in West London, it's now a national organisation known as the Monitoring Group, which monitors police misconduct, which is concerned with understanding the roots of that misconduct, and which works to hold police to account. Also, this year is the 40th anniversary of the Monitoring Group, which teaches us something about doing radical anti-racist work over a sustained period of time. And finally, from a personal perspective, I've worked with the monitoring group for about 5 years. So it's appropriate for me to talk more precisely about our work and our vision for building a just society. The idea of a monitoring group is rooted in the activism of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Among the main activities of the Black Panthers was undertaking citizen patrols to monitor the policing of black neighborhoods in Oakland, California. The aim was to link up as a community and actively organize against a police force that was systematically over-policing, under-protecting, and violating the basic rights of Black Americans. However, over-policing and under-protection weren't exclusive to the US. They were and remain the lived experiences of Black, Asian, migrant, and refugee communities in Britain. In Southall, a young Sikh teenager, Gurdeep Singh Chagga, was murdered in a racist attack on 4th of June 1976, which makes today the 45th anniversary of Gurdeep's murder. The monitoring group's co-director, Suresh Grover, has recalled that when he saw Gurdeep's blood and asked a police officer what happened, the officer replied that it was just Asian blood. That underprotection from deadly street racism went hand in hand with deadly state racism. On the 23rd of April 1979, Southall's predominantly Asian community protested a fascist meeting at the local town hall. But it was the community that was subjected to militarized policing that saw one of the protesters, Blair Peach, fatally struck over the head by an officer. This is just a snapshot of the political context behind the formation of the Southall Monitoring Group in 1981 by local community campaigners. And let me add that the police's disregard for Black and Asian life materialized on a daily basis beyond Southall as well. The official designation by police of areas such as Tottenham, Brixton, and Notting Hill as epicenters of criminality, or as symbolic locations, according to Sir Kenneth Newman, meant that Black community spaces like the Mangrove were regularly raided, young Black people were routinely stopped and searched through sus laws and police operations like Swamp 81, and Black people generally faced everyday police harassment. Furthermore, the racist murder of Akhtar Ali Baig in Newham, East London in 1980, coupled with the police's lack of interest, led to the creation of the Newham Monitoring Project, which fought back against the twin injustices of street racism and institutionalized inaction. My point then is that the very concept of a monitoring group is grounded in certain conditions and motivations. To monitor the police is to understand that the mistreatment of racialized communities is official and systematic, i.e., it's not aberrational or exceptional. Rather, it's part of the fabric of policing that evolves according to the political conditions of the moment. To monitor the police is also to mobilize against institutional racism at a community level, i.e., it's to represent the rights of and work with those groups who have long been misrepresented and marginalized by the state as if they have no rights. Having outlined the historical origins of the monitoring group, let me briefly discuss the key principles that underpin our campaign work. Principles that I believe are a basis for grassroots anti-racist work more broadly. At the heart of what the monitoring group does is advocacy work. However, it's not just about advocating at an individual level. Rather, in the many defense and family-led justice campaigns we've coordinated, we've always tried to foreground the politics of racism. So when we coordinated campaigns for Stephen Lawrence, Ricky Reel, the Bradford 12, and many others, we saw these individual instances of racist violence and police misconduct not as separate and exceptional, but rather as related outcomes of a systematic and routine form of racism. Secondly, our work is grounded in the principle of empowering the communities we work with, which again speaks to the influence and values of the Black Panthers. We view those who are at the sharp end of state and street racism as individuals who have the power to change the broader conditions around them. Holding state agencies to account is pivotal to that process of ensuring social and political change. However, for us, that change is driven by working together with families. Families who have the capacity to analyze their lived experiences, take part in decision-making, and ultimately generate momentum that not only addresses the injustices they have faced, but also understands and illuminates the wider political causes of those injustices. And thirdly, for the monitoring group, campaign work that foregrounds the politics of racism and ensures community empowerment makes it possible to build alliances between different families, communities, and organizations. These alliances point to a common political and historical experience of denial, of disregard, and of degradation, despite the neoliberal drive to atomize and individualize. And for us at the monitoring group, to connect the dots between various forms of racism and then to act upon that common experience collectively is critical. Because as A. Sivanandan argued, it means that individual cases can become causes, and causes can develop into a full-scale movement for racial justice. A movement based not on self-betterment, individual gain, and personal ambition, but on structural change, collective liberation, and political transformation. To conclude, the history and principles of monitoring groups is the history and principles of a radical form of anti-racism. Monitoring groups are part of an anti-racism that situates the policing of racialized communities in its political and historical context. Today, that context involves the hyper-nationalism behind Britain's exit from the European Union, the fascism of a globalized far right, the neoliberalism that denies institutional racism, the authoritarianism of the new police bill, and the enduring legacies of colonialism. Monitoring groups are also part of an anti-racism that commits to community empowerment, where victims of police racism not only have their rights represented, but also have a platform to articulate their lived experiences, to forge ties, and together set out a vision for dismantling a racist social structure and rebuilding an actively anti-racist social structure. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you for listening.